Hi, and welcome to Level Up Your SME Community, Building Better Banks Through Expert Sourcing, AI, Gamification, and Revenue Sharing. My name is Jill Burrows. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Certiverse, and I'm joined by Clyde Supersad, the General Manager of Training and Certification for the Linux Foundation. I think we can all agree that availability and engagement of subject matter experts can make or break a development project. In the past 18 months, we've seen additional issues impede the ability for SMEs to participate, but many of the blockers have long been issues we've had to deal with. Engaged SMEs can improve the quality of your exams. They are more invested in the final product. They will become advocates for your assessment or certification. And by keeping them motivated, you can build larger item banks, which will allow you to not only increase the quality, but also the security of your exam. And it'll cut your development time down, which will get you to market faster. So everyone is motivated by different things, but we have found that using a combination of these tools, it's been very effective for getting SMEs to participate and keeping them invested through the end of the project. So we hear a lot about crowdsourcing, but I think it's really a misnomer. I think expert sourcing is a more accurate way to describe at least what we do into finding SMEs. So in order to get quality out of the experts, you need to know that they have the knowledge and skills you're looking for in participants. So we always start with targeting individuals within the program or industry community. And so whether it's sending communications directly to the current certificate holders, going into industry association and targeting those members, or even LinkedIn groups, you are starting with a minimum knowledge that these individuals are potential SMEs for your exam. And we found that vetting, even through a simple survey, will narrow your search and allow the experts in your community to share their own areas of expertise. And even if they don't qualify for the current project, you can start building a database of experts with their fields of expertise, so you have a more targeted list for the next project. And once you've narrowed your list and you have all approved participants, then invite them to join the project. This controls access to the development, and that way you don't end up wading through a bunch of bad items or unusable tasks. So the traditional mode of development workshops has always been in person. We fly a group of subject matter experts in, hold a week-long session with a number of networking dinners and events, and most SMEs do appreciate this type of interaction. But obviously with COVID, this has had to be adjusted. And most have pivoted to Zoom calls to try and augment that in-person experience. But we've found that sitting on 8-hour Zoom calls is not a good substitute. In addition to the time zone issues, it's been a bad experience for both the SMEs and your employees. And it's proved really not to be a productive method of development. So allowing SMEs to participate on their own time has opened the door to include people from all over the world. And this increases the perspectives and the diversity of participation. But at the same time, you don't want to miss out on the collaboration aspect because it's so important. So including chats and threaded comments allows the SMEs to still interact with each other. It encourages discussion, but it still allows them the freedom to work during the hours that are most convenient to them. So with having SMEs participate asynchronously, you also need to be able to train and guide them when they are ready to write. So we have found on-demand training videos, as well as natural language processing and AI, helps guide them into writing better items. So the natural language processing identifies some of the key issues that happen with item writers, writing negative stems, distractors that are different lengths, using all of the above or none of the above. Some of the things that we would have to catch in heavy editing, we now catch in real time. And so we can avoid going back and doing the editing because it guides the writers as they complete the questions. And lastly, we use a variety of gamification and monetary incentives to keep them engaged. By having a leaderboard, this recognizes all of the top SMEs, and it's proved to be very motivating. And we also employ a variety of gamification and badges to keep the SMEs interested. And finally, we have used different monetary rewards to allow the SMEs to earn extra income by providing their expertise to their industries. And fixed fees per item or for JTA participation have both worked well, but the most engaging has been the concept of a revenue share or giving royalties to the SMEs for the questions that they write. So there are many different ways to do revenue share, but how we do it is we set aside a portion of the revenue for the SMEs and determine the royalty based on the number of times their items are delivered on a live test. And this gives them a stake in the quality and the success of your exams, which makes them go out and be natural advocates. So I'm going to turn it over to Clyde, and he is going to talk about how the Linux Foundation has used these tools in their own development projects. Okay, take it away, Clyde.
Thank you for that introduction, Jill. My name is Clyde C. Prasad. I head up the training and certification program for the Linux Foundation. And really happy to be able to join you all to talk a little bit about our experience in running a very non-traditional method of engaging with authors for test development. So first off, on the timeline, and just a little bit of an overview here. So roughly about 12 weeks, and you can see the segments in here, about 3 weeks for the JTA, about a month or so on item writing, and then some field testing and launch. So for those of you who have been involved in exam development processes, hopefully that feels to you like a pretty accelerated timeline of working on what was a brand new exam and using a very different set of tools and a very different model. And so first off, on how do we go about sourcing Smees? I think this typically is a challenge that everybody faces, particularly when you're creating a new exam. You have questions about the demographic mix, the country mix, the time zones, the logistics of how to get people together, the persuasion and recruitment, and whether it's free or whether it's paid, whether there's staff from the organization, what sort of mix of industries. And what we took was an all of the above approach. So you can see some icons on here. We did push it out through our corporate newsletter and try to raise awareness that way for folks on the opportunity to participate in the process. We did quite a bit on social media, so the normal, the typical types of channels that you might use, Facebook, Twitter, etc. And then we also relied some on word of mouth, to just starting with folks who we have worked with in the past to try to get the word out and try to identify folks who have that intersection of the experience on the topics that we were trying to build on, the availability to do it, and of course the interest to be able to spend time on a process over 12 weeks was the entire length of it. People weren't necessarily involved for that entire period. But having a really good plan for how to get folks aware of it and then pulling them into the process and explaining to them that this was going to be a less overhead heavy process than would typically be the case if you were trying to get these authors together in person in a room or together for a full set of synchronous sessions. And so the reaction from folks when we explained that this would be largely asynchronous, it would largely be non-time zone dependent, the uptake rate was definitely higher than we have seen with similar initiatives in the past. And of course, our positioning was, hey, come with the Linux Foundation, we've got this great portfolio of stuff. It is a good opportunity for you from a career perspective to be associated with what we're trying to do in creating this new exam. So, as would be typical, cast the net pretty broadly to try to find folks who are potentially interested and really emphasize the very different mechanics that we were going to use here in terms of the tooling and the scheduling for folks being involved in this program. The next bit we talked about was the importance of it being asynchronous, the map gives you a rough idea of the distribution of folks: North America, South America, Europe, Asia, Australia. And you can imagine the time zone complexity if you were going to try to schedule these as synchronous sessions. You can maybe get away with a couple of these, but once you put the US and Australia and India together in the mix, there's never going to be a convenient time. And there's certainly never going to be a convenient time to try to do multi-day, multi-hour type sessions. And so this idea of it being asynchronous really was critical for our ability to draw a broad audience of folks. And you can see some of the stats here: 30 plus volunteers, 10 plus countries, plus time zones. And we had very brief synchronous sessions to kick it off. I think they were less than an hour long. And then from there, we moved into the fully asynchronous model, where folks were using the web tooling to participate at every step of the process. The JTA, trying to spec out what the tasks were going to be, moving into item writing, trying to write good items and get feedback from each other to make sure that we can hone those items and make them better as we go. And then once you get into field testing and you're doing some review of items and trying to clean them up and make sure that the understanding of the user matches the intent of the author. And so really being able to use a set of tools here that allows people to engage in a very rich way with the materials, with the content, with each other, and to create a really solid set of content and a really solid blueprint for what the minimal professional competent person should be aware, required to demonstrate. Was really quite impressive, and something that the entire team, I think, felt really good about. Of course, one of the challenges of working in a very asynchronous way like this is you're putting a lot of responsibility on that individual subject matter expert to come in, use the platform, express their perspective on what skills are required and how you might evaluate those skills, and to do so in a way where they're not communal, right? And so in the old days, we would do these in person. There'd be a big whiteboard and post-it notes, and people would really be engaging with each other in a live forum. When you're using these online tools, obviously the individual is at their computer. They might be the one in Australia, so nobody else is online while they're trying to knock this out. And so this idea of having a tool that was smart, that could do some AI type feedback to help guide users, authors, as they're creating these items and thinking about how to create these items was really important, so that they can stay connected through the process. And so this concept of having an AI savvy tool was something that we got a lot of good feedback on from the authors when they got to the end of the process. About it helped keep them engaged as they were thinking about developing their items and providing good guidance to them on the do's and don'ts. And the screenshot here is a mock-up. I think gives you an idea if you look at the text in red, which is the system generated feedback to the author provided in real time as they are typing up the item. In this example, with stem positivity, so you can see the text was what are not the best ways. So it's giving them ideas on how to standardize and use best practices on the phrasing, and then the tonality, right? And so being able to tell whether or not it was being phrased in a way that it was clear that it was a question that was being asked. So lots of other examples we could potentially give here, but the idea is there's some pretty good AI now available and natural language processing, so that as folks are typing, they're getting that good feedback with a consistent set of sort of style guide automation, so that when we got to the end of the first draft of the task, there was a lot more uniformity and consistency than, frankly, we found in our traditional method of having folks come together and work, because there's this AI engine that's really providing ongoing automated feedback to folks as they're in these items, writing them, and as they're in these items, critiquing them with each other. And so the AI piece is important, but then there was also a lot of collaboration in the platform. So if person A put an item in, they would then review 2 to 3 additional items. And so you're getting feedback from 2 or 3 other folks on your item to try to make sure that it's clear, that it's crisp, it's well worded, that the answer looks correct, and the distractors are reasonable distractors to have. And so you have this combination of the AI natural language processing on the upfront phrasing with the community-based feedback from other folks, from other authors looking at that item after they're done writing the item on their own. And again, building that sense of community and interaction and helping them stay engaged and involved in the process as they're going through first the task identification, leading to finalizing the job task analysis, and then moving into the actual phase where they're authoring items for the item bank. And so that level of engagement, that both the community engagement, excuse me, and feedback, as well as the natural language processing, AI-based feedback, super useful. And that's what the authors reported to us at the end of the process when we went back and said, hey, this was our first time through this process. Give us the unvarnished view of how it felt to be a participant in this process, so that we can go back and iterate and try to find ways to improve it the next time around. And generally pretty good feedback. The authors were almost unanimously really happy with the experience that they had had. The other piece, and I don't have a slide on it, Jill spoke to it, is they are being paid. And so I know that over the summer before this recording was done, the first wave of checks went out to authors based on their items being used in the live exam. And folks aren't primarily money motivated on these, and it can be hard to estimate what the payouts are going to look like, what the financial incentives are going to be. But it is really a show of good faith as a sponsor when you're asking folks to contribute this amount of time, to be able to have that mechanism to show them that you're able to provide value back based on what their contribution is and how that contribution gets used in the live exam. And it's a very different model from a static pay per item custom authoring job, right? This feels a lot more engaging. It feels obviously it's an ongoing set of transactions over time as those items keep coming back and being reused in test form after test form. And folks were pleased and excited to get their initial wave of royalty checks and be able to see how that ties back to how their specific item was used and got incorporated into forms. And so that the technology platform here really does create a really interesting and different set of tools and incentive systems from what we traditionally would have used to try to engage Smees on some of these really specific type topics. And just a little sample here on overview on some of the results. So we talked about the speed to market. That was something we were really keen on. We were trying to get this launched prior to the holidays last year, of course, in the middle of the pandemic at the end of 2020. And so being able to launch this prior to Christmas in less than 4 months was a huge achievement. And frankly, there was no other way that we were going to be able to get this done, given that the pandemic was going on, and we were never going to be able to have a traditional in-person item authoring session. And we would not have been able to have the level of facilitation that it would have involved having synchronous group sessions with a lot of moderation having to go into it. And so I don't know that there was any other platform or process that we could have used to get done as quickly as we did, and to still be able to draw on a really big global audience of participants so that we can have the highest fidelity in the exam that we're creating. Really good pickup, so over 1,000 registrations, and those numbers have obviously grown since then. Good feedback from the market anecdotally from folks who have looked at the program. I've spoken to a couple of department heads who have historically used other competing type exams for the credential that we built, which was an entry-level IT credential. And they were really happy with what we produced and the scope of the skills that were tested and the understandability and readability of the items that were put into the exam form. I talked a little bit earlier about the stakeholder feedback, and that really was uniformly positive. We had a large group of folks across a bunch of different time zones using a process and a platform that was very unfamiliar to them. And we got feedback that really reinforced that this is a technology that is mature enough and ready for prime time to be able to incorporate these ideas of asynchronous engagement, and to be able to incorporate these ideas of gamification and revenue, so that folks can see the value coming back to them in proportion to the value that they created into the exam, and then some of the natural language processing, right? Some of the assistance to them as they are developing these items and authoring them into the bank. And we talked about the time initially, but it was also fairly fast, right? And so we had a pretty low cost process. It was less than $20,000 in spend from soup to nuts to create the JTA, specify the blueprint, write the items, field test the items, and then come back to launch. So I think the overall perspective that I hope you're taking away here is we were really, really happy with the process as it unfolded, and the ability to take this set of really innovative tools and use them in a way that in a really compact period of time can get a broad cross-section of subject matter experts who were new to the process, who were new to authoring in many cases, and deliver a really strong result. Okay, I'm going to wrap up there, and we are going to leave some time to do questions and answers. I really appreciate you all joining the session and look forward to answering the questions.